welcome to the Evangelism Podcast. I'm Daniel King, and I'm excited about telling people about Jesus. Today, I have a very special guest. David Jones is with the Global Network of Evangelists. It's a ministry of Luis Palau, and Dave Jones has actually served with the Luis Palau Association for 42 years. And so what a tremendous legacy of faithfulness he has. Dave, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, it's good to be with you, Daniel. So appreciate you and your ministry and the Soul Winners Alliance that you lead. Love you guys. Thanks for having me. It's an honor.
Well, thank you. Mr. Dave, I've been coaching evangelists in how to set up their ministries. A lot of young evangelists are coming to me and say, Daniel, I really want to be in ministry. Do you think I should start a 501c3 nonprofit organization? And they're just going through all the steps that are required in order to have a ministry in good standing with the government and doing things the right way. And one of the questions that frequently comes up is about who they should put on the board and how they should put their board together as they're starting the ministry. And so you happen to be an expert in board development. And so I wanted to ask you some questions about putting together a board for a ministry.
Well, thanks, Dan. Yeah, I remember, golly, it was probably 20 years ago. I was invited to the Billy Graham Center at the Cove, and they invited me to lecture on two topics: uh, building a high-performance board and strategic planning. And what struck me in my lecture on building a board is, and this was a room full of pastors, Christian leaders, evangelists, very sharp, very gifted people. They were writing frantically just about everything I said. And I realized I had hit on a topic that at that time there hadn't been a lot of teaching on. Now it's a lot different now, but I've also, in my years of ministry, have discovered, regretfully, there is in our circle, there is some dysfunction on boards, both in churches and ministries. And a big reason for it is the board has never paused and asked the question, why are we here? What's our role? Where are we going? And that really surprised me because most of the boards I have coached or worked with, they're comprised of very gifted individuals, serious Christ followers, business people who in their own business, they would never hire someone without having some sort of conversation about, hey, this is why this company exists. This is the mission of this company. This is where we're going. This is your role. This is your responsibility. This is how you fit into the strategic direction of this company. They wouldn't hire someone without that conversation. Yet they would join the board of a nonprofit or a church or a Christ-centered organization without there ever being a conversation about, why are we here? What's our responsibility?
Yeah, I've seen organizations that have had very unhealthy boards. Sometimes, especially in charismatic circles, it seems like a lot of boards are just there for the purpose of saying yes to the founder, where you only have maybe 3 people or 5 people that are very close friends of the founder. And whatever the founder says, they say, yes, go for it. And I think the reason sometimes they do that is because they're scared of someone taking over the board or taking the organization in a direction that they don't feel that they're supposed to go. But if you have a healthy board full of people that believe in the mission of the organization and that are qualified and can bring some influence and some resources to the board, you actually can accomplish a lot more with a board that is healthy than you can with a board that is just simply there to say yes to the founder.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely correct, Daniel. A healthy board that understands its role can really transform a ministry and organization. It take it to another level. Conversely, a weak board or a rubber stamp board, it can be disastrous. Usually it leads to dysfunction, and it definitely hinders growth. Again, I don't think boards set out with the with the goal of being disruptive. Um, it's just, again, it's usually because they don't understand. They haven't asked the question, why are we here? What's our role? And they don't quite, they don't get it that they have a really important role in setting policy and strategic direction for the ministry. They have obviously a fiduciary. They have certain legal responsibilities, but one of their biggest responsibilities is just to provide oversight for the ministry, not to be a rubber stamp group of individuals, but to provide some serious oversight uh, for the ministry, and to make sure they're working with the leader, the evangelist, the pastor, in establishing strategic direction, where they've actually set out and they've determined what the mission of the organization is, and then they've put together a strategic plan with the evangelist or the founder or the pastor to accomplish the mission. I think one of the mistakes some boards make is they don't understand that they have that governance oversight role, and they start meddling in minute little non-issue daily details. A friend of mine called it, boards like to get down into the weeds of ministry rather than stay at that higher elevation
Yeah, so talk to me
and
about the
provide.
difference between governing and managing. So
Yeah, well, there's a big difference. I mean, governing is a higher view. It's you're providing that, like I said, that oversight. You're setting policy. You're building some parameters and fences to protect the ministry. You recognize there's uh, uh, some risk assessment. You've got to give that the leadership, the oversight. You're an ambassador for the ministry. I, I you know I, an example, a practical example would be, a board works with the ministry to approve a budget, but the board doesn't manage the day-to-day details of the budget. That's a management responsibility. Boards don't get down in, the GL numbers and asking questions. Well, why did we spend this much on printing? And the board determines the budget, and then the leader and his team, his staff, volunteers, whatever, they manage that budget. Obviously, the board would get monthly or quarterly financial reports because they have a fiduciary responsibility, but they don't get down into the nuts and bolts and details of daily administrating that. I mean, you've got boards are not administrators, they're not managers. They have that very, very important role of determining mission, direction, and providing oversight. So there is a huge difference. I think part of the problem in ministry is oftentimes, especially with small organizations, maybe where there's a founder and maybe only one paid part-time person, or it might be a budget of 200,000 or less. These are very small ministries. Sometimes board members are also volunteers, and that gets real messy, because when do they have their board governance hat on, and when do they have their volunteer sort of non-paid staff on? It can create some confusion, and I think that is a hurdle that smaller ministries have to jump over, have to deal with, when they have board members who are also volunteers and are showing up at the office and getting into the nuts and bolts of the operation. Personally, I think if at all possible, should avoid that. Let a board member be a board member. Let a board member provide that necessary oversight and leadership. Be an ambassador for the organization. Help shape the mission and direction, but not get involved in the nitty gritty, tiny little details of the day-to-day operation. That's a management job.
So let's talk a little bit about the responsibilities of the board. What are some of the major responsibilities that board members should undertake to fulfill?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, they have a responsibility to, in case of an evangelist, to bless, encourage, support the evangelist. They have in the nonprofit world, the board has a huge responsibility to select the leader. Now, in the case of an evangelist, it's a little different than other nonprofit organizations. So first and foremost, they have an important role in selecting, encouraging, reviewing, blessing, caring for the leader and his family. And then second, boards really need to make sure there's an effective planning process in place. I mean, boards need to provide strategic direction, so they need to be involved in some sort of strategic planning where they're helping determine the mission, where they're determining values. So they have a role to make sure there's some sort of written plan for the organization. Of course, boards have a fiduciary responsibility. They have to provide some sort of financial oversight. So they do need to stay abreast of the finances and how the ministry is doing financially, as well as help bring about those resources that are necessary to grow the organization, to accomplish the plan. I always tell leaders, avoid board members that have an allergy to fundraising or funny views about money, because providing financial oversight and money is a big part of running a ministry. Boards also have a responsibility to be an ambassador for the ministry. And that means they have to keep abreast of what's going on in the ministry. They have to be able to speak intelligently about the direction of the ministry. And then obviously boards participate in decision making. There are certain decisions that do require a board advice and input. I think one of the things that boards don't do a very good job of is self-assessment. One of the boards I serve on, my job description is an annual self-assessment where we poll the board, we survey the board, we evaluate how we're doing as a board. We actually grade ourselves on 10 really important areas of our responsibility. So self-assessment is a real important role of a board. And most boards, I'm amazed how few boards do a serious self-assessment. And then, of course, in a Christ-centered organization, the board has to provide some spiritual leadership and oversight. Prayer should be a big part of the board. I mean, I would hope any person serving on the board of a Christ-centered organization is a prayer warrior for that board. I think boards also need to maintain a standard of excellence. I mean, excellence should be a core value of every Christ-centered organization. Boards have also responsibility to keep records, minutes of meetings. There's certain practical things that boards have to do. And then, of course, boards have to recruit and especially if board terms, they have a responsibility to recruit new members who are a good fit. And then depending on the size of the organization and whether or not they're part of the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability or maybe some other group, there are standards, especially financial standards, that a board has to make sure is met. So those are some of the practical things boards should do. And again, I'm kind of surprised that there are boards that just never have that conversation about why are we here and what's our role.
So if someone is about ready to start a ministry, or they recognize that they need to find better board members for the ministry that they currently have, what should people look for in a board member?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Um, I mean, another thing that has surprised me in my many years of ministry is that boards, some boards are not more intentional about who they bring on the board, especially smaller ministries. I think sometimes they're more keen on just assuring themselves that they've met sort of the IRS or some legal requirement. That you have to have in the nonprofit world, you have to have at least 3 board members. And I think sometimes the founder, the evangelist, the missionary, the ministry leader, they kind of find 3 friends and say, "Hey, will you be on my board?" And then they sell them a false bill of goods. We don't meet that often. And it doesn't take any of your time, and there's nothing for you to do. But I just need to find 3 people to be on my board. Well, that's a recipe for disaster. That's a pretty impotent board. They're not going to help you grow your organization. So yeah, there's several things I would look for in a board, especially if it's a Christ-centered organization, an evangelist. There are some scriptural qualifications. Obviously, in the New Testament, there are some qualifications, and I think those need to be abided by. They're there in the New Testament for good reason. I also like to look for people that just really love the Lord with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength. Another biblical principle. A godly people like that. Obviously, you're going to want to look for people that agree with your mission, where you're going, that agree with your values. That are in love with what you do. I mean, those are the kind of people you want on your board. People who have proven to you that, wow, this person really loves what we do. I look for people of faith, big faith. People that, I mean, when you're an evangelist or any ministry leader, you're a faith-based ministry. So you want people with, I would say, with big faith. I would look for prayer warriors, people who passionate about prayer, people who have a positive worldview, who have you definitely want positive people, not negative. There's enough negativity around. Look for people who are encouragers, who are positive, who believe passionately in you. And one of the things I look for, which oftentimes gets overlooked. I'm a huge believer in chemistry and fit. I mean, sometimes boards and leaders, they look for a candidate who maybe has deep pockets or has a reputation for being successful, but they've never asked, is this person a really good fit for our organization and for the other board members? It can be really disruptive to a high performing board when you bring in a board member where the chemistry and the fit is horrific. I remember serving on a board quite a number of years ago, and I was excited. I was a young man at the time, and I was excited to go on this board because when I looked at the resumes of the other people on the board, I thought, wow, this is an all-star board. I could learn a lot by just sitting at the feet of these gentlemen. Well, the chemistry and fit was terrible. I was really surprised. There was a lot of egos, and deliberations at times were ugly. And I mean, I did not find service on that board to be the enjoyable experience that I thought it was going to be. So yeah, fit is really important. Look for people who have a wide network of contacts. You want results-oriented people. And this is hard to do, but you can, with some interviews and questions, you need board members who can differentiate between issues and non-issues. I've coached some boards, and I've quickly figured out that the particular board has a tendency to get down what I call the weeds of ministry, and they start debating things that really are not a board shouldn't discuss. It's a lot of times it's staff work, or it's just what I would call, it's a non-issue. Why are we having an argument or debate over this? It's just not an important issue. You want team players. Certainly you want people that don't have a conflict of interest. You want people with you want on the board a variety of different experiences. Boards have a responsibility of confidentiality as well. You want people to understand the importance of confidentiality. And then a big one, I mentioned this a little earlier, you definitely want board members that don't have what I call an allergy to fundraising. I don't think a lot of board members realize, hey, one of the most important roles they have is to make sure the ministry has the financial resources it needs to accomplish the mission. And you can't be an effective ambassador for a ministry that you personally don't support. So, I think every board member should be a donor to the organization on whose board they serve, and you want to try to figure out, make sure the person doesn't have odd notions about money, just really peculiar, really strange views of money, because that can be disruptive in a board meeting as well. And then finally, this is one that I don't think I've seen this appear. I do a lot of reading. I go to webinars. One that I feel is really important, but I think I'm one of the few people who's ever brought this up. I think it's important that a board candidate, that the person's spouse is just as equally excited about them serving on the board as they are. I think a disgruntled spouse, or a spouse who's not real too excited about their husband or wife joining a board, that can be disruptive. It can be, if Thursday night when the individual's heading off to the board meeting, if the spouse is saying, "Where are you going? Why are you going there? Why are you on this board? You're away too much. Why you didn't talk to me about it?" Yeah, I think it's important you have some buy-in and some enthusiasm from your spouse before you accept an invitation to serve on a board. So those are some of the things I would look for. One that I'm really big on, though, is the chemistry and fit. I think that's so important. If you've ever, for your audience and for the leaders, missionaries, the evangelists watching this blog, if they've ever served on a board where the chemistry and fit was bad, I know for a fact they couldn't wait for their turn to be up, so they weren't at all interested in a second term.
Yeah, recently someone was asking me who they should put on their board, and I told them that there's 3 characteristics that you should look for. Someone should either have influence and help to widen the influence of the organization, or someone should bring resources to the board. So maybe a businessman or someone who can bring a significant amount of resources and has friends with resources, or someone could bring expertise to the board, so having expertise in a particular area. So like on my board, I have people who have influence, so they're pastors that help introduce me to other pastors and put their spiritual endorsement on our ministry. I also have had businessmen on my board who help to support the ministry. And then in the area of expertise, right now we've got a wonderful board member who's a CPA who helps to answer all my questions about money and handling money properly. And so if you can find people with influence, resources, and expertise, and everything else that you said, I say a hearty amen. They need to believe in the mission of the organization, and they need to really love the other people on the board and come with a Christ-like attitude of service. So once you have a good board put together, what are some of the questions that the board should be asking to help the organization?
Well, yeah, that's good. They definitely, I mean, the whole area of strategy and direction, where we're going as an organization, that's huge. And boards, basically a excellent board member, a good board member is someone who brings value to the organization. And part of that value is looking at, like, what are the trends that are impacting this ministry? And as a board, how are we going to address these? Are we missing some policies? I mean, boards are policy setting groups. Boards should ask the leader, hey, what are the opportunities out there? I'm big on SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I mean, boards should from time to time do a SWOT analysis, especially asking the question, what what are the opportunities out there, and how are we going to seize them? Another important question is in the area of risk assessment. I mean, you would think this isn't a problem, but there are ministries out there that have been defrauded, and it's because they just didn't have good controls in place. So a board has a responsibility in that area as well. One of the questions boards, I think they don't like to ask because it involves fundraising, but the boards really need to be engaged in development and fundraising, and ask the question, hey, how are we as a board helping to raise and bring about the financial resources that this ministry needs to accomplish its plans and to move forward? Another important question is the board, once the mission is determined, from time to time needs to make sure the organization is mission focused. There's a great book on the market right now called Mission Drift, and there are churches and ministries, there are Christ-centered organizations that are wrestling with mission drift, and usually it's because they've compromised their mission, sometimes for the sake of getting a certain grant from some place, or they've allowed some donor to have undue influence on the direction. And so they fall in the trap of mission drift just so they can secure a grant, instead of just saying to the individual, what you're asking us to do just doesn't fit the mission. It's not what we're about. We'd love to have you as a prayer partner, supporter, but if your gift has those kind of strings attached to it, we just respectfully decline the gift. That's hard to do. It's hard to do, but boards have a responsibility to protect the integrity and the mission of the organization. Again, this whole self-evaluation, board should ask, hey, is service on this board satisfying? Is it rewarding? If not, why? But boards, there are a lot of, but I think a big question is for the board to ask is, how do we define success? And what are how do we measure what we're doing to ensure that goals are being met and we're being successful? So, yeah, I think measures of achievement are something boards should ask. But again, you don't want the board to get down in the nuts and bolts and day-to-day details and the grind of ministry. That's staff work. That's work for the volunteers and the staff. That's not board work.
Do you have any thoughts on how many people should be on a board relative to the size of the organization?
Yeah, I mean, boards can be too big. I say a board's too big when healthy deliberation is almost impossible because there's just too many people. Boards can be too small when you just don't have enough people to fill committees or get the board work done. So, but I think usually boards too small when the board work just can't get accomplished. You don't have, I mean, on boards, there should be some sort of development fundraising committee. There should be some sort of audit and finance committee. I mean, there's certain committees a board should have so as to subdivide the work of a board. And a board's too small if you just don't have enough people to staff those committees. So I don't think I do think a board can be too big. I know of an organization who at one time had like 100 board members. Well, that's crazy. I mean, I think they just wanted all these people's names or something. Obviously, those people were not engaged or highly involved. And that can be a real governance issue. I think in the case of this organization, they put together some sort of executive committee, which they were the real board. I wouldn't even consider the other people board members because they weren't doing board work. But yeah, boards, well, legally you got to have at least 3. I think
so somewhere between 3 and 100. You got to keep.
Yeah, I wouldn't go as high as I would say between 3 and maybe 20 or 15, depending on the size of your organization. But that's a good question. I mean, yeah, boards can be too small and they can be too big. An interesting story, Daniel. I remember years ago, I was, this is quite a while ago, but I was in a workshop, a leadership workshop, and the presenter asked the question of the audience, and the audience these were leaders. I mean, these were serious Christian leaders. The question was, would you have a board if it wasn't required by law? How many of you would not have a board if it wasn't required by law? And I was shocked, Daniel. Most of the hands, I couldn't believe it. Most of the people in the room raised their hand and said they would not have a board. Well, that clearly says to me that it wasn't the board of these individuals wasn't a high performing board. They didn't understand their role. The board was probably dysfunctional and creating problems for the leader. Here's another interesting story. This was, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. The president of a seminary, a large seminary in the United States, he wanted to meet with me. I couldn't figure out why would a seminary president want to meet with me. But I thought, okay, fine, I'll meet with you. Well, and we met, and I said, I'm glad to meet you, but why did you want to meet me? He said, this is the word he used, Daniel. He said, within our denomination, and he used the word epidemic, we have an epidemic problem. I thought, wow, what do I know about seminaries and epidemic problems in denomination? But he said, we have an epidemic problem. And here's the problem he described. He said, too many of our pastors are quitting the ministry, are leaving the ministry after only 3 or 4 years in ministry. And the reason is dysfunctional boards, boards that are just giving them fits to the point they don't want to be in ministry anymore. And that saddened me because, one, I don't think men and women join a board with the idea they're going to give the pastor, the evangelist, or leader fits, or they're going to, my goal, I'm joining this board so I can make this guy's life so terrible he wants to quit ministry. I think it's just because they don't understand their role and responsibilities because they've never had a conversation for it. I was doing board training, probably 2 years ago for a church. And afterwards, one of the board members, an elder, came up to me and he said, thank you, thank you, thank you. I had no idea why I was on this board and what I was responsible for. Absolutely no idea. Well, that's a real weakness, I think, in our circles, in that there's no orientation for board members. No one should join a board without some sort of orientation. where they're told, hey, this is the mission of this organization. This is where we're going. And this is how you're going to help us get there.
Well, thank you so much for helping boards to be healthy boards. Mr. David Jones is with the Global Network of Evangelists, and you can reach out to them for more information on how to have an effective board. Mr. Dave, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Daniel, it's a blessing. I love you, brother. Love what you do. Love your Soul Winners Alliance. Keep up the good work. Persist, my friend.
Thank you. God bless you.
Daniel King is on a mission to save 1 million souls a year, but he can't do it alone. Would you consider sowing a financial seed today? To give, please visit www.kingministries.com.